I sent out an invitation. I asked everybody if you had a story about Paul or Mama or anything you want to relate to be thinking about it. So I've got a couple of stories, and the first one that I want to tell you about is probably a sports update. How many of you knew Paul Sudduth? Wait a minute. How many of you never saw Paul? Okay. All right. Paul was a big baseball fan. I'm sure Taylor would appreciate this if he was here. Paul was big baseball. When he got the chance, he would play with Dave and I, and he could hit the ball higher and he could hit the ball further than anybody we ever saw. We weren't used to it because when he played with us, we had to back up. Okay. I went into Crosbyton one day to the coffee shop, and they had a big round table where all the coffee drinkers gathered. So I just sat down, and there was a fellow there. I didn't know who he was, but they were talking baseball. And he said the best baseball player he ever saw was Claude Sudduth. And he didn't know who I was, and I didn't tell him who I was. But anyhow, that was one of the greatest things I ever heard. That Claude Sudduth was the best baseball player he ever saw. Okay, I got to see Daddy play his last game. There's a little country school over here called Leatherwood where we went to school. And the guys would just get up a game on an afternoon. And so they got up a game one afternoon, playing, and they'd marked off the field, and the bases were discs. And Paul came up to bat, and he hit the ball over the center fielder's head. And he was circling the bases in a big hurry. And he came to third base, and he slipped on that disc and broke his foot. He never got to home plate. That's the last game I ever saw Paul play.
How old was he?
He was probably 40. Yeah. I was just a big old kid, yeah. And we got to see him play there at the house, but we never did really get to see him play. Okay. Then the other story that I want to tell is a story of Old Blue. Now, Old Blue could be a dog. Old Blue could be a horse. Old Blue could be almost anything. But Old Blue was a car. Okay, for Christmas one year, Paul goes and buys a brand new two-tone green Impala Chevrolet. He didn't trade anything in, he just bought the car and brought it home. And the green Impala Chevrolet always was in this spot in the garage. There was a blue Chevrolet in that spot. Okay, if we were caught up farming, Paul would go to McAdoo, to the farm store, drink coffee with the guys. So he had left, he'd gone to McAdoo. Mama was here by herself. 3 guys walk up. And they're hungry, and they're trying to get the spur. Okay. So Mama, she wouldn't let them in the house, but she fed them out here in the yard. She pretty well fed them and everything, and she was washing dishes, and she heard a car crank. And she looked out, and Old Blue was backing out of the garage. These 3 guys had Mama's car. She ran out the door, waving the dish towel at them, trying to get them. And I'm going to try to tell this in chronological order. They headed east. So she calls down to the house and she says, "They've stolen my car." Okay. So we called the sheriff. Okay. The guys are headed east, and down about 2 miles is the Spur Highway. When they turn on the Spur Highway, Paul's coming from McAdoo. And he looks at the car. And he said, that looked like Mama's car. That is Mama's car. And he got to worrying about her, so he came on home. Okay. Then here's the part we never understood. The guys, we lived about 2 miles down the Spur Highway. These guys in Old Blue stopped right in front of our house. Richie and Diane are playing on the porch. And they look out there and they see Mama's car. And there's 3 guys in Mama's car. Well, they stop for just a minute and then they take off and they turn off onto a ranch road down south of us. So they called the rancher down there and tell him about the guys stole the car and they're headed your way. Well, in the meantime, got the sheriff on the trail. He's alerted the Spur police about they're headed that way. Well, the guy from down at the ranch, he comes to my house and finds out what's going on. He said, get in, let's go to Spur. So we get in and we take off. Okay. So the scene's all set. The police from Spur are sitting out west of town, waiting for Mama's car to come through with the 3 guys. The 3 guys, here they come. Spur police can't stop them. Old Blue just keeps going. So they get into town, and Spur's one of those towns that's got dips every block. And these guys were telling us after it was over, said that old car would leave the ground and sparks would just fly out from under it. And the next block it'd leave the ground and sparks would fly out from under it. And they're trying to stop them, they can't stop them. So they get out east of town with Old Blue, and they pull up alongside Old Blue and they shoot out a tire. And they get it stopped. And they get the 3 guys. Me and the rancher, we get to the police station about the time they bring the guys in. And sheriff from Crosby County, he shows up. He said, you know, it'd be terrible if those guys try to get away on the way back to Crosbyton, you know. But anyhow, we go down and change the tire and we get Old Blue back to Mama's garage. Okay.
What year was that?
I can't remember the year.
Was that Bluebell? The same car as Bluebell?
Bluebell?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We had
Bluebell.
Bluebell.
Yeah. Okay. Late that afternoon, the sheriff drives up to the house and he said, I'd like to see your girls. And what he had before and after pictures. He had taken their picture before he shaved their head. And he had a policy of shaving people's head. He said it keeps down lice. Okay, the end of this story. Over at Crosbyton, the jail is built above the sheriff's residence, above the garage. In the garage, the sheriff kept caged rattlesnakes. And he'd always take the prisoners through the garage on the way to the jail, just to kind of impress on them what they were up against. But that's the story of Old Blue. And
Could you tell that one more time? I missed it. We missed the first of it.
so, what I'd like for, while the food's getting ready and everything, if anybody has a story about anything, you know, Paul and Mama bought this place in 1960. It was built in 1949. Paul died in 1981. Mama lived here until 1983 when she bought the little place in town.
What street was that? Was it Peru?
Yeah,
Yeah.
We drove right there.
201 down South Durham, yeah. And that's where she lived the rest of the time. After Mama moved, we moved in here. And years later, we bought out the heirs. And we lived here from that time on.
Hey, Richard, you might mention my ex-father,
Yeah.
stepfather,
The
is the one that
Ash.
built it.
Oh, yeah.
Stepfather.
Paul and Mama bought the place from a guy named Bill Hash. He was a carpenter, and Bill Hash had bought this thing. Later years, Bill Hash became her stepfather-in-law.
So it started out as part of the house. It first started out as a box
Oh,
car,
yeah, a barracks.
and Bill built
The first
on
part of the house
to
started out
house.
as a barracks, and then he built onto it. Okay, and the bathroom in the, hey, if anybody needs to know, there are 2 bathrooms in the house. Down the hall and to the left, or go as far as you can, and there's another bathroom. The last bathroom, Paul came down with colon cancer. And so he called Bill Hash to build him a bathroom. He wanted a private bathroom, and that's where he stayed. So the bathroom on the end, down at the north end, was one that he had built after he got sick. That's some memories that I had. Anybody?
Spencer, did you have a question?
Well, you know
Oh,
what? I
does
didn't know until here recently. You know, this is an election year. Well, if you knew Paul at all, you knew he was staunch Democrat. I mean, he was big into politics. But I never realized until Daddy said recently that when the conventions started, Paul took off work.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
That's what he said.
yeah.
Just to
Yeah. Yeah. He'd go to kind of convict. And another thing about Paul, in the fall of the year, when the World Series started, we were talking about baseball. Paul would take the back of a cracker box or anything that he could find, and he would fill out a scorecard of both teams, and he would keep score every day of ball players, you know, of the game in the World Series. Yeah.
get to watch it or listen to it?
Listen, no TV back then. It was listen. Yeah. Yeah.
Y'all remember Mama and watching the Dallas Cowboys?
Mama loved the Dallas Cowboys except for Tony Dorsett. Paul loved Dorsett.
Why did she like Tony
I
Dorsett?
don't know. She didn't like Tony Dorsett. Yeah, yeah, that's right. He did. He from the
I just remember Mama would get really frustrated.
Yeah.
And if they weren't doing well, it didn't matter if it's middle of the second quarter, she'd get up and turn off the TV. We're like, Mama, we still have half the game. Oh! You're not gonna
No, she'd get frustrated. She had a way of getting even with Paul. Back at the back, all you see now are stumps. But when they moved here, they planted evergreen trees, and there were elm trees in behind the evergreen trees. So the whole back side was impenetrable by a north wind. I mean, when the north wind came, they had it blocked out. Well, dry years and everything is pretty well taking its toll on all of that. But anyhow, the story I was going to tell, Paul loved to prune the trees. And so he was around back one day, pruning on a tree. Mama came around and saw what he was doing, and she said, "Give me that saw." And he gave her the saw, and she wouldn't let him have it back. She said, "You're not going to cut any more on these trees." So she kept the saw. That's how they work things out.
You might tell about taking the door down.
Mama moved to the place over in town, and she had a heart problem, and I had a little music studio there in town where I gave some lessons, and I think it was Diane came by one night, and she said, "We can't get Mama. She doesn't answer the phone. We can't get her." And so I canceled all the rest of the music classes. And I went down there, and I banged on the front door, and I banged on the back door, and I banged on all the windows. The house was dark, and I thought, man, she's laying in there dead. And so Wasn't anything left to do but just break in. So I got my toolbox out of the pickup. I'm at the front door. And just as I got the front door taken down, Mama comes walking up in her nightgown and said, "Richard, is that you?" Okay. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't. But anyhow. Evidently, yeah.
I remember my dad telling a story about when he thought he'd play a trick on Mama. Was his dad that did this with the pocket knife and the ketchup? Do y'all remember this? He came in. No, he got a pocket knife. You know how you can turn them into like a right angle? He stuck that in his belt loop and put it to where it looked like it was sticking out of his belly. He put ketchup all over it, walked in, collapsed in front of Mama. And she almost had a heart attack. Then he got up laughing. He goes, that's one of the first times I remember getting a belt. And I'm like, there's a belt? He goes, oh yeah, they'll use the belts on you.
Come on, hit a bell.
Okay, noted. We won't try that anymore.
You may know this story about the gun, the starter's gun at Tech.
Like the horse?
No. This was when Jim was in the band at Tech, and the reason I know about it, we were doing a musical thing in Crosbyton one night, and there was a fellow there from Florida, and he came up to me and he said, "I heard your name." He said, "You know Jim Setup?" I said, "Kinda." And so he tells me this story. The band is having rehearsal, and this guy and Jim have got it all cooked up. And they take a starter's gun like they use at track meets. And one of them walked to the other and shot him. Dean Kenyon, like I had a heart attack. You know, he just pulls stuff like that.
Tell the story. What was it one time? Jim did something, burned down something. Yeah.
Burned the house.
Yeah.
Burned the whole house down. Yeah.
There's a little community over here. It was called Broadway. There was a grocery store and a gym and a church. And beside the grocery store was a little one-room shack. Jim and Betty Berry are playing house. He's like this tall. And they're in this one-room shack. And they built a fire. And the thing begins to burn down. Well, when the people notice it, they get out there, and there's no sign of Jim or the Berry girl. They burned to death in the little shack. Yeah. Okay, a little bit later, a neighbor from down south of Broadway brings Jim back up there. When the thing caught a fire, he took off and ran that far. Anyhow, they knew who he was, and they brought him back. Well, when he got home, I think this is the only time I remember Paul giving a whipping. It was usually Mama, but Paul gave Jim a whipping that day. He
You
sure.
were dead, now you're not. Now you're gonna be dead.
Is it true that if y'all fought, Mama would put the gloves on you? And make
Her main.
Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
See if I can make it up right quick.
Told you.
She wouldn't let us fight in the house. She said, if you're going to fight, you get outside. And she had ways of enforcing that. Yeah, she sure did. But we abused Jim a lot.
What were the ages? How far apart were you guys?
Okay, Jim was like 41. I was about 7 years, and Bud was about 5 years older than Jim. Was it Jim? Was it Jim that stuck the screwdriver in my leg or yours?
Oh,
You don't remember? Yeah. Jim was left-handed all the way, and we aggravated him all the time. And I had done something, and I took off running, and Jim had a screwdriver in his hand, and he threw it, and he stuck it in my leg right there. It stuck. I remember one time he got in a fight with Jim, or had him all stirred up, and Jim was standing out in the front yard with a butcher knife. And with that left hand, he threw the butcher knife, and Bud ducked like that, and the butcher knife stuck in the wall. Like that. So,
Hey, Richard, before you finish, tell the story about Jim when y'all went to the scary movie.
oh, okay.
I heard that one.
There's one other thing where Jim abused us. Back in those days, we didn't have indoor bathroom. We had an outdoor privy, if you will. I was there in the privy. Jim comes and opens the door, and he says, "Where's Bud?" I said, "I don't know where Bud is." Jim had a board in his hand, and he laid my head open right here. Kabam. Okay, I go to the house. Well, I'm in there, yeah. So I'm walking to the house, and blood's just pouring. Mama's at the back door, and she sees me, and she screams. But anyhow, they took me to the hospital, and the doctor sewed it up. But
what had you done that made him mad?
Bud made him mad,
Bud made me mad.
and I wouldn't tell him where Bud was.
Tell the story.
Yeah, so
Better
so-
fend yourself.
What does that have to do with the movie?
Okay. The greatest thing for us boys was to get to go to the Lindsay Theater or the Clifton Theater in Lubbock, Texas. They had carpet on the floor and everything. I mean, it was nice. And if you got to go to one of those theaters, that was great. For some reason we were in Lubbock, and me, Bud, and Jim got to go, I think it was the Lindsay, we got to go see Bud Abbott and Lou Costello meet Frankenstein. And so we get in there watching the thing, and it's supposed to be a comedy. But he got real serious with Jim because we looked over at him and he was under the seat. He would not, he wouldn't watch it. He couldn't take it. So he got under the seat.
Well, one of the best things, my memory lacks a lot. Richie's always bringing up stuff that I think she makes up because I don't remember. But I just remember that when we were young, every holiday, we all came. Then we came here. Everybody came, and there was so many of us. All the men ate first. And then they back there into the big tent to watch whatever ball game was on. And so when they were eating, there was no talking. Then the women and kids would come in, and then here's all the chat. You know, that's where all of the conversation went. But when we were little, there was always music. We always had music. Everybody gather around with the instruments and stuff, and Claire Joe and Ma and everybody. I mean, we had 3-part harmony. I mean, music has always been huge in this family, and everybody always made it a point to get back here. And when I think back on our childhood, those are some of the best memories I have, you know. I thank God a whole lot because I was blessed to have my grandparents as long as I did. And the pictures that y'all will see inside, Pa, when I saw him most of the time, was in striped overalls and he had an old straw hat. Now, and I started to bring it over here because one of the last ones he had, it got a hole in the top, and he took a piece of bandana and stuck it down in the hole just to make it work, you know. But he was always around. He always had a big old garden down there close to where we were. And when the potatoes and all that kind of stuff, you know, he would gather it. And for a long time, he would bring it real early. Pa and Grandma got up early, big time early. He would bring it and he'd bang on the door. Well, it'd make Mom mad because he'd wake us up and all he wanted to do was say, here's just some potatoes, or here's just some corn, or whatever. He finally got to where I guess she run, you know, ripped him a new one a few times, I don't know. But he finally got to where he'd just leave it on the porch and he wouldn't knock anymore. He'd just leave it on the porch, you know, but it was there. But one of the sweetest memories, I think, of Pa, and it's not my memory, but Don, which is my husband who's not here, he didn't get to know Pa very well before Pa died. We weren't married but a few years, and then we moved off down to Balmoral. Pa was already diagnosed with cancer. But anytime you bring up something about Pa, he says, I will never forget. Every time that man saw you, he immediately smiled. He said no matter what kind of pain he was in, what he was dealing with, he always smiled. And he said that made a huge impression on me. So, just so y'all know.
Hey, Richard, they saw a snake, so you might want to go out there and make sure.
Snake?
It's an okay snake.
No.
She,
It's probably the one that's under the porch, but
she talked about Paul when he got sick. I got a call one night from Mama, and she said, Richard, said Paul's in the hospital, and they're fixing to take him to Lubbock, and said, can you go with him? And I said, yeah. So I followed the ambulance over there, and the doctor examined him and told me pretty well what he thought. They operated on him about 3 o'clock in the morning, I guess it was. But anyhow, they were going to give him treatment, radiation treatment. So for a few times, I would carry him over there and do the treatment, and then we'd come home. And he told me one day, he said, I can do this by myself. I said, okay. So, I think Mama would ride with him. Anyhow, he'd go to Lubbock, and he'd take his treatment. He'd come back around the loop, headed for home. So he came down, he was coming around the loop one day after a treatment, and a cop stopped him. He was speeding. The cop gave him a ticket. Paul comes right straight to Crosbyton. The county attorney was a guy that was raised right down here, and Paul known him all his life. And the county attorney tells me this story. He said Claude walked in with his ticket in his hand, and he said he threw it on the desk, and he said, I'm not going to pay this, and walked out. And he said, it left it up to me. And he said, I took care of it. So Paul never paid the ticket. If we're getting pretty close to eat, I've got instructions from somebody. Oh, that's one thing. Do y'all want a photo made before you eat or after you eat? Because there's going to be a photo. Nobody said anything. Okay.
We're not big on pictures.
I know. I tell you what, let's do it because it won't take that long. And the idea that's been presented to me is that we'll get out here at this old abandoned pickup. We'll put the boys up on top. And we'll just everybody get around it or on it or somewhere or other, and we'll take the picture with that old truck. I was gonna, Brenda, you want to come tell them? We're gonna have the meal cowboy style. Does anybody know what cowboy is? What cowboy style? You get your plate and you fill it and you just eat where you can.
Well,
Find a spot.
tell them the great room has long tables and long chairs. But you're welcome to come out here with your plate. Just make yourself at home. Eat your home.
Yeah,
So
everybody
make
just
yourself at home.
make
Wherever
yourself
you
at home.
want. There's a lot of places to sit inside. A lot of places.
Yeah, the big room
Whatever you want to do.
has got lots of tables set up, and I think that's where the desserts will be. We've got barbecue and everything that goes with it, and